Okay, it's 5 p.m. So, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first public engagement webinar for the update to the Larmer County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan, which you're going to hear about here in a bit. My name is Josh Roberts, and I'm the Mitigation Coordinator for Larmer County out of the Office of Emergency Management. And this evening, we'll have a presentation provided by our consultant partner on this project, Scott Field with WSP. Before I turn it over to Scott, though, just a quick note about the meeting facilitation. Just heads up, we're recording this meeting and we hope to post it to our webpage within the next few days to weeks. So in case if any of you have to jump off early for some reason and or for others who wanted to make it but couldn't make it, it'll be available on our website in the next days to week or so for them to watch as well, recorded version. Also, in terms of presentation facilitation here, if you've got any questions, that's absolutely okay, and we want your questions. I'll monitor the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar here while Scott is speaking and can provide some answers just either in response to that Q&A feature or occasionally I might note them for Scott just at a good point break time in his presentation. We can provide some answers verbally. But if you have any questions, please feel free to use that Q&A feature and know somebody's monitoring it. So again, with that said, thanks for being here. Thanks for your interest in mitigating hazards here in Larmer County and reducing our risk. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Josh. As Josh said, my name is Scott Field. I'm a contractor with a company called WSP USA. We are here to talk about the updated hazard mitigation plan. We'll do introductions here in a second. Quick overview, we're going to do introductions here in a second, and then talk about what hazard mitigation planning is, why we're doing it. We're going to talk about the components of that, which starts with the hazard identification and risk assessment, which is the what can go wrong. And then we'll talk about the mitigation strategy, which is the what are we going to do to make it better part. And we'll talk about the project and schedule and next steps. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions and discussion, any questions or comments you might have. So just as a note, we've got everybody muted right now just to keep background noise down and so forth. This is being recorded. I need to let you know that. We will be taking questions and comments at the end. There is a link here and also a QR code if you're having Zoom problems that I can't help you with. If you want closed captioning to help out, feel free to, there's a little CC sign here on the screen, I think usually on the bottom of your screen. Along with, there's a raise hand feature. When we get to the end for comments, we'll be using that if you want to ask a question or something. You can also put questions in the Q&A, and we'll be addressing them as they come up or at the end. Part of this is to kind of present information to y'all, but the more important part from my side, at least, is to get input from the public. So we really want to hear what you think about what we're going to be talking about tonight. So encourage you to help out. So again, there's the raise hand icon on the Q&A. We're not using chat for this meeting. So, but if you put anything in the Q&A, we will, like you said, we want to get your input and we want to answer your questions. So. With that, do some real quick introductions. You already met Josh Roberts, who's the mitigation coordinator for Larmer County OEM. His boss, Lori Hodges, can't make it tonight. Said, my name's Scott Field. I'm with a company called WSP USA. If you were here 5 years ago, the last time we updated the hazard mitigation plan, and you think I look familiar, it's because I was. 5 years ago when we did the plan update, we were called Wood, and we got bought out. So same team, just a different name. So. As you can see, I have kind of a deep bench of folks supporting us here. We're all based in the Denver Front Range area. So it's good to be working in our own backyard. So what is hazard mitigation and why are we planning for it? So some quick definitions, because some of these terms get used, a lot of people use them different ways, but the way we're using them here tonight is a hazard. We're talking about anything that can cause harm or damage or any kind of negative impact on the community. Okay, and it could be something natural like a flood or an earthquake or a wildfire, could be something human caused like a cyber attack or a hazard materials release or even a terrorist attack. Okay, And then vulnerability is the where can the community be impacted or negatively hurt by that hazard. And then, so in other words, if a hazard happens, but it happens in a place that it doesn't damage anything we care about, it's not a big disaster, right? So it's where those two circles overlap. That's where we have risk. Okay. And the goal of mitigation is basically kind of shrink this red overlap as much as we can, either by addressing the hazards where we can, or more likely by reducing the vulnerability of our assets. And mitigation, for the purposes of this project, is defined as any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life and property from hazards. That's a long sentence, but it just means anything we can do to reduce the impacts of the hazards we're going to talk about, make a safer and more resilient Larmer County. Why are we doing this? Well, if you watch the news, you probably have a perception that the disasters are getting bigger and more frequent and more expensive. And you're absolutely right. That is totally accurate. This is a slide from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency. I always get that backwards. Just showing the number of billion-dollar disasters in today's money, this is adjusted for inflation, that we've had going back to 1980. And you can see back in the 80s, if we had 3 or 4, it was a bad year. Now if we have less than 15 or 20, it's a good year. So they've gone up tremendously. And this is just weather disasters. Doesn't count COVID, doesn't count 9/11. It doesn't count even things like earthquakes. This is just weather-related disasters because it's the Weather Service looking at it. But the trend is similar for other disasters. The bar is going up, and that's not a good thing. So why is that? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. One is just more population and growth. There are more people, more homes, more people living in areas that are at risk. We have people moving into wooded areas or remote areas that there didn't used to be people there. So now they're more exposed to wildfire risk. Not just the people, but all the infrastructure, the highways and the utilities and everything to get them there and to support them. Just that means there's more stuff exposed to disaster. We're definitely seeing more hazard events and more severe hazard events. And we'll talk about climate change here in a little bit. We're seeing more federally declared disasters. And then also there's increased cost of response and disaster. And partly that's because the cost of building things has gone up so much that just buildings are more expensive, partly because of cost of materials, but also because we've gotten better at building buildings that don't fall down in a hazard event. So if I showed you the cost or the chart of fatalities and injuries due to hazards, that line actually goes down, which is a great thing. That's good, but the cost of that is then sometimes these buildings and infrastructure are more expensive to repair. So why do we need to do something about this? Well, as local government and I say we, I've worked in local government most of my life, so, but before I moved to the mercenary side, but there is a legal and ethical responsibility to protect the public, right? And also, just as we saw in the previous slide, we can't keep going on the path we're on. The cost of doing nothing is too high. Things are getting so much more expensive. We can't do nothing. We have to address this somehow. A lot of these hazards are repetitive and predictable to a point. Like I can't tell you when the Pooter will flood next time. We all know it will, right? It's a when, not an if. So we know that there are things that can be done to reduce those to reduce impacts of those hazards. The things that work well, that have been tested well in Colorado and across the country and around the world. They are very cost effective. They're good for the environment, and there's funding available to help. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Going back to cost effective, there was a study done by the National Building Institute that found that every dollar spent on mitigation saves us $6 in response and recovery costs. So that's a pretty good return on your investment, right? And that's just as a nation. That's not looking at individual projects, but overall. So that takes into account the projects that didn't have a disaster afterwards and weren't needed. But it's still, that's and it depends, the amount varies depending on the type of hazard we're looking at. But overall, if I told you could spend $1 today to save $6 tomorrow, that's a pretty good investment. So how do we break this cycle? That's kind of what we're trying to do here is, we have this cycle of we keep rebuilding and then we have another disaster. It's like the old Monty Python skit. If, you built a castle and it sank into the swamp. So built another castle and it sank into the swamp, and he built another castle and it caught on fire and then sank into the swamp. We're trying to break that cycle, right? So that we're not just rebuilding the same thing over and over, where when we rebuild smarter. We rebuild in a way that is going to be less likely to be damaged in the future. This is that study I mentioned because I forgot I had a slide for it. You can see here. So what this shows is for different types of hazards, the return varies a little bit. For wildfire stuff, the return's relatively low because a lot of fuels reduction and brush clearing, you have to redo it every few years, right? It's not just a one and done. But even so, 3 to 1 is a pretty good return on investment, right? And overall, 6 to 1 is the return on the return on mitigation as an investment. So apart from everything else, it's just a good financial investment. So there is a federal regulation that called the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. Basically says state and local governments, if you want to get FEMA mitigation funds, you have to have an approved hazard mitigation plan. Okay? And the purpose of the plan is partly to be eligible for funding, but what it's really meant to do is look at all the different stuff that the community is already doing to reduce disaster risk. Look at it kind of holistically and look at everything in one place and figure out what are the ways where we can work together and what we can do to further reduce those risks. And again, the bottom line here, reducing losses, making the community more disaster resilient. And it does need to be updated every 5 years, which is why we're back here. I think this is the 4th iteration of the Larmer County Plan. It's a lot can change in 5 years, so definitely time for an update. I'm not going to go through this in detail. This is the planning process. If you just look at the big numbers, the 4 phases are kind of getting organized, which I call it the getting the band back together stage, right? Fortunately with this, we're not starting from a clean slate because we have a pretty solid plan that was written 5 years ago and we can just update it. We are pulling together a lot of the same people that were involved 5 years ago. And then the second phase is the what can go wrong stage, where we're assessing risks and identifying what are the hazards we're concerned about and trying to quantify them. And then developing the mitigation strategy or the what are we going to do about it stage. And then the last piece is the most important one, which is adopting it and implementing it, right? And this is something that you're really lucky in Larmer County. There are a lot of jurisdictions where the plan gets written and they check the box and then it sits on the shelf in a pretty 3-ring binder for 5 years until it's time for the next update. That's not how Larmer OEM works. Larmer County and the municipalities up there, Fort Collins and everybody have been so active in conducting hazard mitigation and reducing losses and reducing risk. So you're all very fortunate that you have a forward-thinking government there working for you. So let's talk about what the plan isn't. First of all, this isn't a regulation or a regulatory document anyway. So none of this is mandating anything. We're not telling you what you have to do with your home or anything. It's not a set commitment of resources. It's a wish list of things that we would like to do as funding becomes available. But the plan itself is not committing any resources, right? As you'll see from the previous plan and the new updated plan, there are going to be some actions that are practical and down to earth and kind of low hanging fruit. But we also want to look at some more ambitious actions to kind of to go after. We understand that this is based on the availability of resources, not just the availability of funding, but the availability of time and staff to manage and complete all these activities. So there's a lot of actions. We'll talk about the actual mitigation actions here in a little bit, but there's not like any kind of requirement or quota you have to meet that you have to have completed 20% of your actions or 50% of your actions from the last plan. So that's not what it's meant to be. I think I've used the term planning area here, and Josh used the term multi-jurisdictional before. So what that means is we're looking at the planning area we're looking at is Larmer County and the incorporated municipalities and special districts within the county. So that includes like towns like Berthoud and Timnath that poke out into Weld County, or some of the fire districts that go into Boulder County. We're also looking at the parts of their town that are outside of Larimer County. But this is not just a county level plan. It includes a whole bunch of jurisdictions. As you can see, basically almost all of the incorporated municipalities, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as a bunch of fire districts, the EMS district, some watershed coalition and conservation groups, sanitary districts, some water and sanitation districts, and a couple of schools, both Poudre schools and CSU. What is if you happen to be from Windsor and you're wondering why town of Windsor isn't on the list, that's because, going back to that previous thing, they're mostly in Weld County, and they elected, as it happens, Weld County is updating their hazard mitigation plan as we speak with a different contractor, and they elected to be part of that planning process. No need to go through it twice. So the parts of Windsor that are in Larimer County will be covered in the Weld County plan, just like the parts of Berthoud that are in Weld County will be covered in the Larimer County plan, if that makes sense. So that's why you don't see the town of Windsor on here. So the planning team or planning committee that's formally called the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee, or the HMPC. And it's comprised of a whole bunch of people, both government and non-government. We have the list here of government departments is both at the county level as well as at the municipality level for the towns and cities that are, as well as at the along with the fire districts and the sanitation districts and everything like that. So there's a wide variety. It's not just something emergency management is doing. You know, we want to make sure we have the public works guys and the road and bridge teams, and we want police and fire at the table and everything. Additionally, there's a whole bunch of state and federal stakeholders. I'm not going to read through the list here, but basically the whole alphabet of acronyms that operate in the area. Some of these come to meetings, some of them just provide information or serve as stakeholders. And then also we have a bunch of other people that we've invited into the process, to include the county and local elected officials, some businesses, nonprofits, a number of private nonprofit groups, the general public. Hello. And then we already mentioned schools, watershed coalitions, and a few other special districts. So it's meant to be very broad reaching. We want to make sure we have the broadest view of mitigation. So, and that requires having the right people at the table, which means, by the way, as you're looking at this list, if you see a glaring absence, let us know about it. Put that in the Q&A, because if there is somebody we're missing that ought to be included, we want to add them in. So if you know of a group, or you're part of a group that would like to be part of this, please let us know. All right, so what have we done so far? So we kicked off this project a little over about a month and a half ago, I guess, with the kickoff meeting for the planning team on August 26th, which was conducted virtually. And we've been going over starting the risk assessment, and which is, again, looking at the hazards and updating the risk assessment that was done 5 years ago, as well as looking at the capabilities that the jurisdictions have to work on mitigation projects and to reduce hazards. We have to look at both sides of that, right? What needs to be done, as well as what realistically can be done, and where can we improve on that. So we've been doing a lot of research on that, as well as getting input from the planning committee and stakeholders, updating information and statuses of mitigation actions. I'll talk through all of that. And then we do have a couple links here. One is the project website, which is on larimer.gov, which will take you to, actually, I can show you that. So if you click on that link, or you just search for Larmer, or go to larimer.gov and go to the Office of Emergency Management, there's a link here for hazard mitigation planning. It kind of talks about what we're doing. And then if you scroll down here, you can see the slides. You can watch the recording of our kickoff meeting, or just read the meeting summary. You can keep abreast of updated meetings that we have, and just kind of will keep you abreast of the progress as the project moves forward. Also, we're launching today a public survey, which will be open for 2 months. And if you click on that link, it'll just take you to a real short survey. And I'll talk about what's on that survey here in a minute, and I'll put that link up again later. But we want you to help I encourage you to take that survey as well as pass that on to other folks that might be interested. All right, so now we're going to talk about how we identify which are the hazards we're concerned about and how do we assess the risk that is associated with those. Again, there's three pieces to it. One is what can happen. One is the vulnerabilities of what can be affected. And then we also add in what's already in place. What is the community, whether it's government, private sector, individual, homeowners, what's already being done to reduce those, right? Those kind of the three big components of a risk assessment. So this is the list of hazards from the 2021 plan. And that we're looking at updating. We may be adding a couple more hazards to it. And of course, we'll be reviewing the significance of all of these. But the significance is kind of based on how often it happens or how likely it is to happen, how much of an area is affected when it does happen, and then how bad is it? And we have benchmarks for all of these. So to kind of compare apples to apples a little bit, but then we just kind of overall, what is the significance of all these hazards? And if you don't see any low significance hazards here, well, that's because you're in Larmer County, which has a lot of hazards, but also because some of the low hazards that don't really have any impacts, we're not really spending a lot of additional time planning for them. So I'm going to go through these, each of these in not a ton of detail, but kind of talk about them individually just so you get a sense of what's in the plan. Now, as I said before, we've just started the process of updating the risk assessment and doing our new maps and updating our analysis. So what you're seeing here, like all these maps are going to be from 2021. We haven't kicked out a whole bunch of new maps and new analysis yet. So most of what we're showing you here is 5 years old, but want to give you an idea of what's in the plan. And again, want to hear your thoughts on it. So obviously, if you've lived in Larmer County for more than 5 minutes, you know that wildfires are a big risk up there. In fact, during the last plan update, we had not one, but two federally declared wildfires during the planning process. We're hoping to have 0 this time, but that's something I have very little control over. We're particularly worried about, for purposes of this plan, when wildfires happen out in the middle of nowhere, that's bad. But when they happen close to town, that's really bad. So mostly we're looking at where there are homes interspersed with or adjacent to wildfire areas. So this is mapping actually from the state identifying the wildland-urban interface, or WUI risk in the area. And of course, we have these more detailed for the individual cities and so forth. And then we can analyze, how many residences live in this area here that's at high risk, and what utilities or infrastructure is in that area, and how can we protect them. Flooding, also a big deal in Larmer County. And as particularly those of you in Fort Collins know, that's been something that the city and Larmer County has taken seriously, very seriously for a great many years. So this is the FEMA mapped floodplains. The dark blue is the 1% chance, or we used to call it the 100-year floodplain. And then the lighter blue is the additional, the 0.2% annual chance, used to be called the 500-year flood. And the reason we stopped calling them that is because when they called it a 100-year flood, a lot of people thought, well, we just had one, so we won't have one for another 100 years. And that's not actually how it works, right? So in any given year, there's a 1% chance of that area flooding. And in the light blue area, there's a 0.2% chance of it flooding in any given year. So that's kind of how we look at that. Now, note that flooding risk is not limited to these areas, right? We can and do get plenty of flooding outside of mapped floodplains, particularly when you're just looking at like storm or water, rain runoff and so forth. But so we don't just look at the floodplain areas, but that is kind of one area that we kind of concentrate on and look at what we can do to reduce the risk there. You can kind of see why, just in terms of losses, flood is one of the more expensive and damaging hazards that we have as a nation, and specifically in Larmer County. So you can see by jurisdiction or by community how many total flood events you had, how many injuries, and not too many fatalities, fortunately. And I think all of those were several years ago, but still, a lot of injuries and a lot of money. I mean, that's 300 million. That's just a lot of money. And that's actually, I'm just realizing a typo in here because that, no, it does include the crop damage. If that crop damage number seems low, because that is uninsured crop damage, right? Most usually when crops get damaged, it's an insurance payout. So this is that 225,000 is only counting stuff that wasn't insured. So again, a total of 7 fatalities and 40 injuries, most of which were within the city of Fort Collins. Severe thunderstorm, of course, kind of related to flooding. When you have a big thunderstorm and a lot of rain, you're probably going to get some flooding out of it. But in addition to the water, we have hail. This is by far the most damaging or the most expensive hazard that we have in this country, and particularly in Colorado, although it's most usually covered by insurance, at least to some degree. So that 4.5 million in damage, again, that is uninsured losses. But the biggest event we had in Wellington back in 1995 had $500,000 worth of uninsured damages. Lightning, it happens all the time, and most of the time it doesn't cause injuries or deaths. But I mean, that is more deaths and injuries than we've had from flooding, and that's just since 1996. So particularly up in the backcountry, lightning is a killer. And then of course we also know that it can cause property outages and start wildfires. Severe wind, also something pretty common in the Front Range, and has caused quite a bit of damage. Going back to 1954, it's 13.8 million. And one single event in 1999 did $7 million worth of damage. So high wind is something we may be used to, but it still can be very damaging. Another type of high wind is a tornado, which are more common on the Front Range and kind of on the plains than in the mountains. But you can see from here, we have had some in the mountains. Most of the tornadoes that we've had in Larmer County have been relatively small. But you can see they've still done, we have had as much as an F3, and they can do quite a bit of damage. $65,000 in total damages, usually part of a thunderstorm. And we mentioned here that almost 4% of the total housing is mobile homes because, as you're probably aware, mobile homes are much more likely to be damaged from tornadoes. Folks call them tornado magnets. I don't know if they're more likely to be hit, but they're certainly going to get more damaged when they are hit. So then on the other side, we have summer weather problems, but then on the other side, we have winter storm. And, we're no stranger to cold weather or to winter in Colorado, and certainly not up in Fort Collins, Larmer County, or not. But we can still have pretty severe events. It takes a lot of snow to constitute a disaster here. When I was the emergency manager for Denver for a number of years, and whenever it showed 6 inches of snow on the Weather Channel, I'd have friends from other cities all over the country calling me to ask if we'd activated the EOC and how things were. And I'm like, dude, it's 6 inches of snow. It's Tuesday. So. But that said, we can't afford to take snow lightly because it can get very serious. We've had 379 recorded events. Again, most of those are pretty well handled, but a total of 31 million in property damage is pretty significant, and 1 fatality from that. And then one of the things we look at for all hazards is what are the populations that are going to be disproportionately affected by the hazard. In this case, one of the things we look at is the elderly, who are more susceptible to cold, as are children for that matter. People who are disabled, 8% of the population in Larmer County is dependent on electricity for their mobility, for their independence, or in some cases their lives, right? So whereas for a lot of us, if the power goes out, it's an excuse to get offline and light some candles and read a book for a little bit, right? It's an inconvenience more than anything. But if that impacts your ability to live independently, then or if impacts your ability to get medical care, then it can become a serious disaster very quickly. All right, moving away from weather events to more ground-based stuff. We don't tend to think of Colorado as earthquake country, but as you can see, we do have have had a lot of earthquakes and do continue to have a lot of earthquakes in Colorado. Um, and particularly, a lot in the metro area, but also quite a few up here in Larmer County. In fact, the most damaging earthquake in the state's history, as far as we know, or at least recorded, was up near Estes Park in 1882, and that was estimated as a 6.6 magnitude quake. If that happened today, that would be massively damaging. Some of you may remember there was back in the 60s, or you may have heard of this, there was a series of earthquakes in the metro area that were actually caused by groundwater injection out at Rocky Flats. My boss is a geologist, and apparently that event is in like every geology textbook ever written because it's like such a clear example of a human caused or human induced earthquake. Caused more than 1 million damage in Denver. And again, if that happened today, yes, our buildings are built better, but we also have a lot more of them. So it would be really devastating if that happened today. And then more recently, back in 2011, you may remember some earthquakes down in Trinidad that were magnitude 5. So we do have quakes in this country, or in this, sorry, in this state and in Larmer County. Not as frequently, but when they do happen, it can be a pretty bad day. Landslide and rockfall. I'm going to talk about landslide quickly, first, but obviously more significant in the mountains where you need vertical slopes to have a landslide, but can be damaging. Both the main impact usually is shutting down roads. Which is not just an inconvenience. I mean, that has a major economic impact and can cause injuries and fatalities. But then we also can have it when it happens near urban areas. It can damage properties, infrastructure, and even kill people. Rockfall is the same thing. If you're wondering why the rockfall risk stops in this neatly divided square here, that's because this is where the Colorado Geologic Survey surveyed, right? So the risk doesn't end here, just that's where they stopped surveying. So but that should tell you that if they surveyed this area and they found that much landslide risk, that if they surveyed here, it would probably look pretty similar, right? So no surprise, in the mountains, steep slopes, rocks fall. But again, we're not just looking at individual rocks, we're looking at damaging slides that can really do significant damage. On a smaller scale, erosion and deposition is a major thing. We saw a lot of this after the 2013 floods, where we had a lot of rivers that were just moved. They were out of their banks and they just completely washed out new pathways and so forth. And in some cases, we just learned to live with that. In some cases, we had to restore the streams back to their original land. And obviously, if that soil gets eroded in one location, then it ends up somewhere else. And that's what we call deposition. So both of those are a problem, right? If you're wearing away the land here, that's bad. But then when that soil ends up somewhere else, that can cause problems on the other end as well. Talking more about human-caused incidents, we do have a large number of dams in Larmer County, in or upstream. So there's 148 dams that could potentially impact Larmer County. Of those, 59 are considered high hazard, which basically means there are people downstream, and it could result in loss of life. Significant hazard dams means there's property downstream, which means we probably won't kill people, but we could have a lot of property damage. And then low hazard means there's there could still be people like hiking and fishing there, but for the most part there's not a lot of built area downstream from them. I want to stress that the high significant low ratings are not a measure of how likely this event is to happen. They're just a measure of how bad it would be if it did happen, right? And the Colorado Dam Safety Bureau, underneath the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Division of Natural Resources. They go out and inspect these dams annually to make sure that they are in good condition. And if they are not in good condition, then we look at what we can do to make them better and so forth. So there's 161,000 people in Larmer County that are living in the mapped inundation areas for one of these dams. So that's a fair number of people. Now, obviously, the odds of dam failures are very rare events. The odds of all of these high hazard dams failing at once and impacting 161,000 people, that's not a realistic scenario. But even so, any one of these high hazard dams could be a life-threatening event if it failed. And Larmer does have a very good bad example of dam failure back in '82 when the Lake Dam in Rocky Mountain National Park failed. And it did kill. The fact that it only killed 3 people was frankly a miracle and was largely due, I think, just to some really heroic actions on the part of the park rangers and responders in and around Estes Park. Is the only reason that number wasn't a lot higher. Pandemic, you may know that we had a pandemic just a few years ago. So, and not going to go into excruciating detail on this, but if you look at the history of pandemics, we've had 5 in the last 100 years. We tend to average one about every 20 years. There is some indication that may be increasing. The frequency of those may be happening more often due to increases in international travel, largely. Just we're more mobile as a global society. So as soon as something starts, as soon as the disease starts somewhere else, it very quickly winds up here and becomes our problem. So again, key vulnerabilities, we're looking at children and the elderly. These vulnerabilities are very significantly depending on the individual pandemic or what the disease in question is. I believe I think the Asian flu in the 50s hit children very, very hard, whereas COVID did not. It was more impacted on seniors and the elderly. So, and then of course, people who live below the poverty level and don't have access to, don't have a lot of resources to deal with it, don't have jobs that they can do from home, are more susceptible. And of course, people who don't have good health care, don't have access to good health care are more vulnerable. Hazardous materials, also sometimes called hazmat. Excuse me. There's a lot of different chemicals and natural substances and all kinds of things that are shipped through Larmer County, either by road, by train, or by pipeline. And again, 99% of the time, that's not a problem, but every once in a while it is. You can see here the number of reported hazmat incidents. Again, back in the 80s and 90s, it was fairly low. We saw a big spike in the 2000s, kind of evened out a little bit through the 2010s. And it seemed like it was maybe going down a little bit. The last couple of years, it's been trending back up a little bit. So hard to say, but definitely over time, still been kind of an increase. And you can see about half of those are at fixed facilities, which is good. At least we know where they are. And we generally know, the fire department generally knows what's at that chemical plant or that storage facility or whatever. When a truck or a train rolls over, it's a little bit harder because you don't know what the material is right away. And then we also look at utility failures or disruptions of infrastructure. We're looking at primarily power failures, because again, that can be, for some people, it's an inconvenience, but if it goes on very long, we mentioned extreme heat and extreme cold weather can be very deadly. And basically, as soon as if you lose power, then you are much more vulnerable to either of those hazards, particularly if they go on long. And again, people dependent on electrical equipment are much more vulnerable. Can also have massive economic impacts, okay, both from even from road failures or loss of gas to an area can have major impacts. Again, most of them fairly small, managed pretty easily. Again, I hate to call it an inconvenience, but usually most of them are, but it's the big ones that we're worried about. and that we want to keep track of and know what can we do to make sure that we're ready for them, and what can we do to minimize the impact if it were to happen. And then lastly, civil disturbance. We're not talking about free speech here. We're talking about violence, okay? And there's there are literal books written on the subject of when one shades into the other. That's way beyond the scope of this report. But Larmer County is no stranger to civil disturbances. This is a picture of the CSU riots back in, I think, was it the 80s? I'm trying to look at the card there. I can't remember the date, but if I remember right, that was in the 80s. And we've had several recent ones there as well. There are some, I think most of these were CSU related, but there have also been a number of protests that have sometimes turned violent. Again, in addition to the violence and property damage and damage to, or injuries and deaths potentially, can also cause economic disruption and affect the public's confidence in local government to do their jobs. So again, we're not here to try and muzzle free speech or stop peaceful protests, but what can we do to make sure that to either keep these from getting out of hand or managing them when they do? And again, mostly that is a law enforcement issue, which is beyond the scope of this. We're just looking at it from a very broad mitigation standpoint. Okay. All right, so those are the hazards we're looking at. The one thing I realized I didn't have a slide in there was extreme heat, which we covered a little bit in the previous plan under drought and summer weather, but we've talked about breaking that out as its own hazard for the new plan, because extreme heat is actually the biggest killer of all those hazards in the United States. And again, particularly less of an issue up in the mountains, but particularly with things getting warmer, we're seeing that become more and more of an issue, and especially hard hit on people who don't have or can't afford air conditioning, or when the power goes out. So we're going to be looking at that as a separate hazard too. Okay, so moving on now, we're going to talk about what we can do to reduce those impacts. So what are we going to do about it, Stage? So there's kind of three stages of the mitigation strategy. One is setting these broad overall goals of what are we trying to accomplish, right? So that we kind of have a strategic framework here to operate within. And then work down to developing specific actions or activities. These are like the specific projects that we want to do that will reduce risk. And then how do we implement them? Okay, it's easy to come up with a list of projects, but that in and of itself, creating a list of projects does not reduce risk, right? You have to do something with that. You have to implement those, administer those projects, find funding for them, and so forth. So that implementation is a huge piece. And like I said, you're lucky to live in a county where that takes that very, very seriously. So the goals from the previous plan, I'm not going to sit here and read these to you, but it's basically protecting people, property, and natural resources, increasing community resilience, strengthening communication and coordination between agencies, increasing public awareness, and then integrating hazard mitigation into other planning mechanisms. I loved seeing this goal because it's really easy for mitigation to get kind of stovepiped and just, we're just looking at like FEMA projects, and, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on out there, and hazard mitigation works best when it's integrated into other things that are going on. So, we're looking at your comprehensive plan, for the county or the city or whatever, and does it incorporate hazard information into the communities, or into the comprehensive plan or the community strategic plan? Are those goals, do those goals align with the mitigation goals? For example, if one of our goals in the plan, and I've seen this in other communities, is to have a goal of, reduce reduce properties at flood risk, right? Or reduce construction in the floodplain. But then you go to the comprehensive plan and they've identified floodplain areas as areas to build more stuff. Okay. Luckily, again, you live in a community that doesn't do that and takes that more seriously. But we want to see that kind of integration between different plans so that everybody's kind of working together. Below the 5 goals, we also developed 5 objectives from the previous plan. Again, not going to read through these, but expanding public awareness, enhancing training, incorporating risk reduction into policy documents. Again, I love seeing that, and not just because I'm a policy nerd who writes stuff, but because I think it's really effective and very cost effective. Again, at collaborating with area partners, working with mutual aid, and then again, reducing the vulnerability of local assets in the community. So objectives are kind of an optional step between like the big lofty goals. These objectives are a little more focused down on specifically what we're trying to accomplish or how we're going to accomplish those goals, right? And then this kind of drives the type of actions that are going to develop. So at our next planning team meeting, we're going to be reviewing these goals and objectives, see if we want to update any of them for the 2026 plan. If you have any thoughts on these, or you think there's anything missing from the goals or objectives, again, please let us know. And then we get into the actual mitigation actions. And I've referred to what are we doing about it a bunch of times. Well, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Well, there's a couple of different categories. Or there are 4 different categories we look at. First is planning, is plans and regulations. And again, this is a very cost-effective measure of just, implementing modern building codes and enforcing them. Having good land use ordinances, having rules against building in the floodplain, or having restrictions or requirements if you do build in a risk that's in an area that's at risk. Just having those regulations and so forth can make a huge difference. Now, obviously, you have to balance that with other factors, but a very effective way to reduce risk. And then structure and infrastructure projects is when people think of hazard mitigation, that's probably mostly what they think of, which is like, oh, we're going to put in a bigger culvert here, right? Or we're going to redo this drainage, or make a bigger drainage pond here to catch the runoff and so forth. There's a lot of those sorts of structures, both in the metro area and throughout Larmer County, all kinds of projects. There are a lot of them that you would never know they were a mitigation project. There's a lot of parks in the Front Range that just look like really nice parks, and you would not know that it's a flood control area or that that's a flood retention pond until you see flooding in it, right? So a lot of these projects don't have to be ugly. Also, education and awareness is a really big part of this, which is making sure, again, that not just making sure that the public knows what these hazards are, but making sure you know what you can do about it. Letting you know what the government is doing about it, but also here's things you can do to keep your house and your family and your business safe from hazards and reduce your risk to these hazards. Yeah? And then lastly is natural systems protection. And we see a lot of this in Colorado, and particularly in Larmer County, whether that's stream corridor restoration. I know Larimer's been very active doing a lot of that. Sediment and erosion control. Also, that bottom right picture, brush clearing or fuels reduction in wildfire areas. Anything like that where we're kind of working with nature rather than against it, basically. So those are all broad categories, but they give you kind of an idea of the types of things that we're looking at. As far as when we look to identify, and there's no quiz on this at the end, so if you're trying to write all these down, don't worry about it. There's a number of categories or things we look at when we're picking mitigation actions and then prioritizing which ones we want to do first. The list on the left is called the Stapley criteria. Someone at FEMA came up with a great acronym for that, which is looking at the social benefits or the social impacts of doing it, both good and bad. The technical side of it, is it technologically feasible? Is that something we can actually do? Administrative, does the community have the administrative staff to do the project and to implement it? Is there political will to do it? I can sit here and tell you all day about how great building codes are. There are parts of this state you'll get death threats for suggesting that, right? So if there's not the political will to implement a thing, then maybe we don't need to spend a whole lot of time chasing that. Legal, is it something that we have the legal authority to do? And we, again, meaning state and local governments. And if not, is it something we can partner with somebody else to work on? Again, these aren't necessarily deal breakers, but there are things you'll look at to concern. What are the economic impacts? From all these projects, we want to do at least a basic kind of cost benefit analysis. We think it's going to cost us this much to build this culvert, and we think it's going to save us this much And as long as it's saving us more than it's costing us, then that's a good project. And then we want to look at the environmental impacts, both what are the impacts of doing the project? Are we disrupting the natural landscape to put in this culvert or whatever? But then also, what are the environmental benefits? Are we saving the natural resources and areas downstream? And then it's just safety criteria. That things life safety is always the first priority. So we want to look at, is this going to save lives? Particularly, we look at, as I mentioned before, those populations that are more disproportionately impacted by hazards. We want to make sure we're not ignoring them and in fact actually paying attention to them. We tend to prioritize the high risk hazards. Doesn't mean we ignore the lesser ones, but obviously if those are the ones that we think are going to do the most risk, we want to concentrate on those. Whenever possible, we love projects that will affect multiple hazards at once. So if it's something that will reduce risk both from dams and from flooding and reduce drought impact, that's a threefer, right? That's great. So we love those. Protecting critical facilities is always key. And then we look for a project if there's, who wants to do this that's is going to champion this project, because all these types of actions and activities are way more likely to get done if you have, it's real easy for me as a consultant to sit here and write it into the plan. And it's even easy for the planning team to do that, but who's actually going to take this project and run with it? So these are all things that, again, that we look at. So the current Larmer County plan has a total of 196 actions that were identified during the 2021 planning process. And you can see the breakdown here. I'm obviously not going to go through the list of all of them, but you can see that there's no quota any jurisdiction needs to meet here. You can see the larger municipalities tend to have more, generally speaking, a few more actions than some of the smaller rural fire districts and so forth. But everybody has at least a few. And as part of this planning process, what we'll be going through is going to each of these and say, hey, those 7 projects at Town of Estes Park, those 7 projects you had last year, what have you done? And again, there's no quota you got to meet. There's no expectation that Estes Park has done all of those. If you have, great, gold star. But that's, we usually don't see that because a lot of these are, big projects that sometimes you just didn't get funding for it. Yet, or you can only do so much at one time, right? There are always other priorities. But we'll go to them and get it started. Have they started it? Or maybe it's in progress and they haven't, maybe they finished it and we can check the box and move on. Maybe, no, we haven't started yet, but we want to keep it in the plan. Or maybe some of these actions they may have looked at and said, we decided it wasn't cost effective to do it. Let's cross that off and we'll delete that action. So we'll update this list for next year as well as developing new mitigation actions. And when we do have the draft plan out, you'll actually have that list of actions to review. I believe the current plan, by the way, is available on the county's website that I just put up before. If you do want to go take a look at it and see what's in there, I encourage you to do so. So looking at some types of projects that we typically see get paid for with FEMA mitigation funds. And I want to pause here for a moment. Again, if you've been anywhere near a TV in the last year, you know that there's been a lot of there's a lot of stuff going. There's a lot happening in Washington D.C. right now, and a lot of that is happening at FEMA. And they've had a number of grant programs and stuff canceled. So there are still a number of funding grant pipelines out there. There are a couple that have been canceled. Everything that we're hearing is that the administration does want to keep doing hazard mitigation. So we are expecting that at some point we'll see some of these grants come back in a different fashion. Don't know what that'll be. But while the requirement for this plan is based around FEMA funding, we're not just looking at FEMA money to do this, right? There's a lot of other sources out there. And in fact, one of the things that Josh and I talked about in our last meeting is we want to make sure, given the uncertainty in Washington, we want to really make sure we're looking at all different available funding sources, both other federal agencies, state funding, private nonprofit or charitable groups, business groups, and just what are all the different ways we could fund these different projects. So when I say FEMA funding, take that with a little asterisk there. But when we're talking about flood mitigation, what that can look like, again, can be, we need a bigger culvert here because it floods every few years, or this bridge gets flooded out. Detention ponds and channel stabilization, anything local like that. Flood proofing of buildings, elevating of homes. You see that a lot, particularly in coastal areas, but even in riverine or along lake areas, where you raise the home up so that it's above the flood line. In some cases, we'll buy out properties that are at risk. And instead of residential areas, we'll turn them into green space, or turn them into a risk that is, or a use that is less damaging when it floods. And then we mentioned stream restoration or waterway restoration has been a big factor in Larmer County over the last several years. As far as wildfire, we mentioned fuels reduction, and there's a lot of names under that of, like vegetation removal / removal. There's a lot of stuff that falls under that label of fuels reduction, but all the fire departments in the area are very active in doing that. And as funding becomes available, that's a very easy, I don't want to say it's easy to do, it's hard work, but there's definitely always more fuels that need to be cleared. And like I said, the challenge with wildfire mitigation, a lot of it is it's not a one and done. You can go through and do the best vegetation clearing you can, but in another 5 years, it's probably going to be overgrown and you might need to go in and do it again. Defensible space is also a key factor. I'm sure you've heard that in Larmer County. For the planning purposes, we're looking both at having defensible space around critical infrastructure or around government buildings, but we also want to look at defensible space around residences, whether that means providing information to you as homeowners so you know what you can do to protect your homes, or providing tax benefits or incentives or whatever ways we can do that to encourage the use of ignition resistant shingles and the like. So there's a lot, again, that falls under this category of wildfire risk reduction. Other types, I mentioned property acquisition, whether that's floodplain areas or landslide areas. Certainly you see a lot of slope stabilization efforts with nets up on the mountains and so forth, or in some cases just building, putting in Jersey barriers, you'll see, to direct the landslide away from the parts we want to protect. Utility protection infrastructure retrofit. Xcel's been very aggressive in hardening power lines throughout the area or throughout the state. In some cases, that means burying them, but in some cases where that's not effective, it just means putting up stronger towers and stronger lines that are less likely to be impacted. Safe rooms are a less common thing in Colorado than they are in Kansas and so forth. But it's still something that is good to have, not just from a tornado standpoint, but also making sure we have shelters in public areas for when a hailstorm comes, that everybody can get under cover when the bad hailstorm starts. Generator installation, backup power is so important and so critical for being able, particularly for government facilities, being able to continue to provide services and continue to help protect the public during disaster, right? The fire department isn't much good if they lose power and they can't open the door to get the fire truck out, right? And I use that as a joke because I'm sure every firefighter on there is going, dude, that's not how it works. We know. So, but generators for both for critical facilities as well as for the general public and businesses that want to have them. And then there's a lot of kind of climate resilience activities. You may notice we don't treat climate change as its own hazard in this plan, because climate adaptation and climate resilience is its own animal. That's a whole separate thing. Larmer already has other plans that address that, and we're tied in with those plans. What we do consider as part of this plan is based on the best available science, what are the potential impacts or the likely impacts of climate change? How are they going to change the hazards that we've listed? Are they going to make them more frequent, more severe? Are they going to impact the area that's at risk? How is it going to change? How is the future of flooding going to be different from what we've seen in the past, right? So as part of that, ways to be more resilient with that, anything that kind of falls under the heading of green infrastructure, which could be groundwater recharge. The classic example actually is after Hurricane Katrina, there was a big push that they had deforested a lot of the barrier islands that used to weaken hurricanes before they hit land. So there's been a big push to kind of replant those. So there's a lot of stuff that, again, where we're working with nature instead of against it. Okay, so that was a lot. I know that was a lot of material. Again, there's not a test on this at the end, but what I want to do now is kind of talk about where we are in the schedule and what's going to happen over the next year, because this is a pretty much a full year project. As we started the project in August, and we're due to wrap it up in about July of next year. The current hazard mitigation plan that Larmer County has doesn't expire until September. So we've got a little bit of a buffer. Again, you're lucky that you have an OEM that didn't wait till the last minute to apply for funding and hire someone. Not bad mouthing anybody. But we've, as I said, you can see we had the initial planning meeting, the kickoff meeting in the end of August. We're now having this public meeting here, we kind of wanted to do it in September, and for a couple of different reasons, we wound up pushing it back a little bit. Meanwhile, in the process, we're doing a bunch of data collection and reviewing that. We've been reviewing all the facilities information and parcel data that we've gotten from the county and the municipalities and all the special districts, and finding out what stuff they own and where might it be at risk and what can we do to protect that. The next task, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap here, right? Because while that's going on, we've already started the risk assessment that I've been talking about, as well as the capability assessment of analyzing who has what they can do. And we're planning to have our next planning meeting is actually going to be in early November, which is going to be kind of reviewing the risk assessment that we've done so far and what's changed in the last 5 years. Then we move into kind of the mitigation strategy part. And we have our third planning meeting. We may or may not have it in the last half of December. That's a big ask. So these dates are approximate. We'll see how it goes. But targeting sometime in the end of the year, we'll have that third planning meeting, which is going to be a workshop where we get the planning team together and we kind of brainstorm new mitigation actions and figure out what I can do to work with you and where what you're doing impacts what they're doing and that sort of stuff. So that's where we really get into the meat of what are we going to do about it. And then we are looking at having a second public meeting. It's probably going to be after the first of the year. Like I said, we've got it targeted as February right now, date to be announced. The purpose of that meeting is going to be, by that time, we'll have a draft plan that the planning team has reviewed and is pretty happy with. And we're going to have another meeting like this where I'm going to introduce you to the plan and kind of talk about a little bit what's in it. And then we're going to have some materials for y'all to review, and we're going to ask you to review the plan, or at least review portions of the document, and tell us what you think. So we will be putting the plan out for public review and comment sometime in early 2026. After that, it goes to the state for review. We're really lucky in Colorado. The Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management does really good plan reviews. So if there's anything that we've overlooked or missed, they usually catch it real quick before we send it to FEMA for review. And then once the state buys off on it, it goes to FEMA. They've got 45 days by statute to review it, and then we'll make any edits or changes that they want to see. And then around next spring, all the jurisdictions, the municipalities and the fire districts and all the other special districts that I showed on that slide at the beginning will all take it to their governing board, whether it's the county commissioners, city council, the board of directors, what have you, to formally adopt the plan and buy into it, have that buy-in going forward. And then hopefully the goal is to have this whole thing wrapped up by July. A couple of the things I passed over here, you may have noticed, I have a couple CRS coordination meetings here. And what that is what's called the Community Rating System. And this is something, it's a program, you may have heard of the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP. That is flood insurance that is provided by the federal government through FEMA for homes that to insure against flood, because most private insurance policies don't cover flood. As part of the NFIP, the FEMA has an optional program called the Community Rating System, where It's like the NFAP says you have to do, here's the minimum standard you have to meet. The CRS says, okay, if you go above and beyond that for, if you do more and more to make your community safer and more flood resistant, you get rewarded with a discount on your flood insurance fees. So right now, the city of Fort Collins and the city of Loveland are both part of the CRS program. Loveland is there. There's 9 classifications. From the lowest is 9, the highest is 1. I believe there are no class 1 communities in the country. That is a very a very impossible goal to meet. There are like 4 or 5 class 2 communities for the CRS in the US, and Fort Collins is one of them. And has been for quite a while. So ever since the Big Thompson flood, Fort Collins has taken flooding very, very seriously, and they are literally one of the leaders in the nation for flood for the community rating system. And as a result of that, if you own flood insurance, if you have flood insurance and you're in Fort Collins, you're getting a 45% discount on your flood insurance prices. So they would be almost twice as much if the city wasn't part of it, wasn't that active in the CRS program. Loveland, I believe, is a class 5, which is also really, really good and gets a 25% discount. If I'm counting on my fingers here, right, I believe is a 25% discount in Loveland for being a class 5. One of the things we're going to look at as part of this plan update is for the other communities, does it make sense to join the CRS? It is there's a really high administrative cost involved in the CRS. It is a very paperwork and resource intensive program, and not all cities or towns have the resources where and may not have enough flood risk to make that cost effective. So it's not right for everybody, but you're really lucky that Fort Collins and City of Loveland are so active in that program. So those CRS meetings are kind of internal, where we're just making sure as part of this plan update process, those cities will get CRS credit for this plan update, and we want to make sure that we're checking as many boxes as there so that they can maintain those CRS statuses. Also, in this last row down here, and I'm pointing at the screen with my finger, I do that in every meeting, this PERS coordination is the Plan Integration for Resilience. Josh, you're gonna have to jump in. I can't remember what PERS stands for, but it's a plan integration program out of Texas A&M. And they've been great at, I mentioned before that mitigation works best when it is integrated in other planning mechanisms. Well, that's what this is meant to do. So they're coming in, Larmer County OEM has brought them in to look at all their plans. Emergency management rewrite a lot of plans. Yes, they got emergency operation plan, an evacuation plan, and public alert and warning plans, and all this stuff. And they're going to come through and look at all of those, as well as like your comprehensive plan and whatever else you have, and the hazard mitigation plan, and make sure again that they're all talking to one another. So it's a fantastic opportunity for us and for Larmer. Thank you. Plan integration for resilience scorecard. Okay. I knew plan integration, and I was pretty sure it was resilience. I had no idea what the S was. So thanks, Josh. So yeah, that's a great opportunity for us, because it's really going to give us a great opportunity to make sure that this plan is not something that just you pay an overpriced mercenary from Denver to write, and it sits on the shelf for 5 years. That's not how Larmer OEM operates. So, all right. So moving forward. What's going to happen as far as public integration, and how can you remain a part? Well, you may have heard we're having a public meeting on October 9th. So thank you for participating in that. I know this has been, it's not a real sexy topic, but I really appreciate you all taking time out of your Thursday evening to participate in this. I also mentioned the public survey. We'll be sending out some additional information on this, but if you want to either go to that link And if we can put those links in they're already in the chat, is the link both to the project website and the public survey. So if you click on that link, or if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to this online survey. And we're going to ask you what your experience is. What kind of hazard events have you experienced as a resident of Larimer County? How many have you had flooding, or have you been in a severe winter storm, and so forth? And how worried about each of those are you? We're going to list a bunch of hazards and ask you to tell us. We know how serious we think they are, but we don't know how serious you think they are, because that's obviously. If there's a disconnect there, we want to know that. And then we're also going to list a bunch of types of mitigation actions and different activities we could do, and ask you what you think your local government should be spending money on. Okay? And then, as I mentioned, in probably early 2026, late winter or early spring, we're going to have a draft plan out for review. We'll put that out for review and comment, and try and have the final document's thick. So hazard mitigation plans are not light reading. Just going to say that up front. The last plan, we were very proud that we got it in under 1,000 pages. So now that part of that is because each community has like their own annex. So you wouldn't have to read the whole thing. But still, it's a thick document and a lot of appendices and very technical. We recognize it's not a light read. So we're going to try and give you some summary materials to review and so forth, and make it a little easier to digest. Well, we're going to put that out for review and comment. We're going to have another public meeting where myself or somebody else is going to kind of walk through the plan and talk about what's in it, and kind of ask for your feedback on it. And then I already mentioned, if you visit the Larmer County OEM website, Josh is posting updates there. After all of our meetings, we'll put in the slides, and the recording for this meeting will be up there once we get it ready, as well as meeting summaries, kind of monthly progress reports of what we're doing, so you can keep informed of what's going on. And then however you found out about this meeting, whether it was through a social media post or you're on somebody's email distribution list, we'll be pushing all of this stuff out through those channels again as well. So again, invite you all to take part in that when it comes around, and let us know how good a job we did and what we missed. Okay, I've been talking nonstop for about 70 minutes, and I'd really like to take a break and take some questions from y'all. So I'd like to hear from you. And again, if you want to put this in the Q&A, great. Or if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you and unmute you. But we want to know, what are the hazards you're worried about in your community? What are the ones that you're concerned about and you think we should be concerned about? What do you think we should be doing about them? And just kind of in general, what are we missing? What else should we be thinking about? Looked like somebody had their hand up briefly, but then didn't want to be the first deer out in the meadow, which I respect. If anyone has any questions, or Josh, what did I miss? What did I forget?
Scott, I think you did a great job walking through the process and just providing a pretty tremendous overview of the plan and sort of what we're wanting to accomplish, with it. So if it's helpful, I might toss out a question just to kind of get some people's thoughts going here. I don't know if I saw, in terms of hazards that might affect us in Larimer County, I don't know if I saw avalanche hazard on the list. Perhaps I missed it. And so I'm wondering, and I know we talked about it a little bit, but I'd also be curious as to other thoughts as well. I know there's a lot of backcountry risk and things, but, is that something that we need to consider in our list of hazards to analyze?
I believe. Yeah, that was not included in the last plan. But yeah, it's something we can look at. Certainly throughout Colorado, and particularly in the mountain areas, avalanche is a significant hazard. So yeah, we can look at that. There's Josh, I know you know this, so I'm speaking to you, but the Colorado Avalanche Information Center is an organization that keeps track of avalanche fatalities and injuries and just general avalanches throughout the state. So there's actually a lot of good data on that. But Colorado is the is the avalanche state. We have more avalanches and certainly more avalanche incidents and injuries and fatalities than any other state. So yeah, that's a really good point. Remind me after this, and I'll make sure we bring that up in the next planning team meeting. So, what other questions? I know I didn't cover everything. I know somebody's sitting there thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or why didn't he mention that, or how come he didn't talk about
Scott,
that?
we have a question from Greg.
Oh, great, Greg.
Greg, I've unmuted you.
Yeah, I noticed Cooter School District is on the list. What about, there's at least two other school districts in Larmer County. I was wondering why those aren't on the list.
I can take that one, Scott. Yeah, Greg, thanks for your question. And I actually responded back in the Q&A feature there to help. But yeah, great question, good observation. And really the answer is this. So in the run up to before we even were able to bring on Scott and his team as consultant partners here, we initiated a pretty widespread invitation to partner jurisdictions and organizations, in this space. And here in Larimer, some jurisdictions, organizations chose to participate or engage in this process with us as the formal participating entities, and some elected to just engage as stakeholders. Stakeholders, less formal, less requirements in terms of meeting FEMA planning standards for these plans, but certainly all, widespread invitation sent, and all are invited to participate in this process, with us. So it's a great question. We certainly welcome, their participation moving forward in any of these conversations.
Right. And from a practical standpoint, the only real difference is participating in this plan update is a big lift. I mean, you hired a bunch of mercenaries to do the heavy lifting, but there's still a lot of work. And for small jurisdictions and school districts that don't have a lot of staff, sometimes it's just not feasible to participate. I think both Thompson Valley schools and Estes Park schools participated 5 years ago, but weren't able to this year. The only real difference is if they wanted to apply for FEMA funding, is they'd have to go through the county to do it. Whereas Pooter, by participating in the plan as a jurisdiction, then would be able to apply directly to the state. That's really the only difference. So it doesn't mean they can't do mitigation. It doesn't mean we're not sharing information with them. It's just a less formal process. Good question, though.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, Greg, thanks for toning it out. And we'll certainly follow up with representatives from those organizations too, just to make sure that they're aware of the process and perhaps staff have changed. I mean, who knows? But to make sure that they got all the information, they need. So yeah, thanks for observing that and toning it out for us.
Good question. Who's next? Can we get the first one out of the way? That's always the hardest. Should be easy now.
Scott, I do have a question in the Q&A tool.
Oh.
So I'll ask it and then you and I can maybe cover down on it. But
yeah.
Pete asks, how does the plan cover rural areas outside of the mapped regions that we show? So Scott, if you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's a great question. So I said this when we call this a multi-jurisdictional plan, it means we're looking at everything is kind of the short one. So we're not just, we are also looking at the municipalities and areas, but we're not just looking at there. We're also looking very much at the unincorporated county, which is specifically, the part Josh is specifically responsible for, right? Is the unincorporated. So when we do our analysis of residences that are in the wildland urban interface area, that you'll see a table in the plan that lists, Fort Collins and Estes Park and Berthoud, and then unincorporated county. So we absolutely do look at that. And in some cases, the risk is greater in the rural areas. In some cases, the risk may be lower, but also the resources are lower generally to respond to an incident. The response time may be longer. So yeah, that is absolutely something that we look at and try and identify where are those both those hazard issues and also those resource or capability limitations that could make things potentially worse. So yeah, good question. Anyone else? Going once, going twice? It's Thursday night, and actually, I have no idea what's on TV on Thursday nights. I haven't watched network TV in a while, but it used to be. It's like, oh, it's, Friends is on. Everybody wants to. I do want to point out we originally were, or at one point we were looking at doing this last Friday. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Josh. Of course, football night. We were looking at doing it last Friday, and I'm not saying we canceled that because Taylor Swift dropped her album the night before, but it was a contributing factor in the decision. Thought maybe we get a little better participation if we waited a week. So again, I know this was kind of a dry topic. I tried to make it a little interesting, but if you have any questions, again, this is the end of this meeting, but it's definitely not the end of the process. And we really love to keep you all engaged and informed in the process. So as we go forward, again, like I said, if you have any questions or you have any information you want to provide to us, there's anything you think we want to know that you didn't get a chance to ask tonight, please feel free to email Josh or myself. Or like I said, if you go to the county website, there's a way to submit comments there. I'm going to go back to that public survey page and again, the link is in the chat where you can scan that QR code. We'll send this information around separately. Please push that out to other folks. Again, we want to get a really good cross section of the community as much as possible, and make sure that what we think is important reflects the reality on the ground. So, so again, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your attendance. And it's nice to see a good turnout for this. We will be recording this and putting it up, so we'll send around a link for that. So if you're talking to somebody else that wanted to make it and couldn't, or the time didn't work, you'll be able to just send them the link and they'll be able to watch it then. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And again, it's a great overview of our hazard mitigation plan, the plan update process, and a walkthrough of things that we'll be thinking about, over the next almost year or so. So really appreciate you, Scott. Thanks for that. And to everybody, again, to reiterate what Scott said, appreciate your time and interest in mitigation of hazards and reduction of risk in this beautiful place that we call home, here in Larmer County. And as you can see from Scott's presentation, we take this job very seriously because we know that there's life, limb, and property, and the things that we value in our way of life that's at risk and on the line here. Our county leadership and if I may speak on behalf of all of them, the entire hazard mitigation planning team is committing to undertaking this plan update to help all of us. When I say all of us, the community movement, if you will, to help all of us provide a good North Star and a roadmap for mitigation actions for the future, for those mitigation efforts and reduction of risk. So really appreciate your time. And with that, thanks for joining us this evening, and you all have a great night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.